Hello and welcome back to another episode. In this video I'm gonna review Robocop for the Commodore Amiga. At least this was my first idea when I thought about making this review. But while I was working on this review I noticed that this game was released for so many other systems, so I thought that I'm also gonna include a couple more versions as well in this review. Anyways, let's go.
Serve the public trust. Protect the innocent. Uphold the law.
Robocop for the Commodore Amiga is a side-scrolling action game that was developed and published by Ocean Software, and it was released in 1989. The game is based on the Robocop movie from 1987, and it is a conversion of the arcade game which was released in 1988. The arcade version of Robocop was developed by Data East and by another company called Nihon Busan. I guess this is how you pronounce this name. And it was published also by Data East. Now before we take a look at the Commodore Amiga version, I thought we're gonna start with the arcade version since it was released first and since the Amiga version is based on the arcade version. In the game you take control of Robocop and you have to fight your way through 7 levels full of criminal henchmen who will try stopping you from tracking down the people responsible for your brutal death. At the beginning of the first level you can only defend yourself with your fists, but just after a couple of steps Robocop pulls out his trusty Auto 9 pistol from the company Beretta, and from there on it's your main weapon throughout the entire game. But if enemies get too close to you, Robocop will attack them with his fists instead of using his pistol. In the levels you can find a couple of useful items like extra life energy to replenish your life bar, then 2 kinds of special ammunitions, spread shots and armor piercing bullets. Then in one level you can find an item that increases your life bar, and one specific enemy type is armed with the powerful Cobra assault cannon from the movie, which you can pick up and use after you've defeated them. But you only get a short amount of bullets for the Cobra assault cannon, and also not a lot more when you pick up one of the special ammunitions. You only have 1 life in the game, but for another coin you get a continue.
For your cooperation.
On the top of the screen you can see the current high score, then the score of player 1 and player 2, the time that you have left to beat the level, and the current weapon/ammunition type plus the bullet counter. Yes, you can play this game with a second player, but it is not a co-op game, so there is always only one Robocop on the screen, and after one player beat a level or ran out of coins/continues, the other player continues with their game. On the bottom of the screen we have the life bar of Robocop, and when you encounter an end boss, which happens at the end of each level, it will also show you their life bar as well. As for the controls, you have a fire button, a jump button, and with the stick Robocop can crouch, walk up or down stairs, and to the left or to the right of course. Plus he can aim in 5 directions. To the left, left up, right up, and to the right side. Since there are almost no platforming elements in this game, you're gonna use the jump button mostly to dodge enemy projectiles and for attacking boss characters because their weak spots are in the upper region.
You are under arrest. You are under arrest. You are under arrest. Thank you for your cooperation.
There are also two bonus stages after the second and the fourth level, where you are at the shooting range and you have to shoot as many targets as possible until the time limit runs out. And depending on how well you did, you not only get extra points, but you also get extra life energy. And if you are actually able to get a perfect score, your life bar will also increase as a bonus. By now you might have already noticed there is actually a big variety of enemy types in the game. There are the normal goons, people with pistols, others with Uzis, guys on motorcycles, guys with hockey masks and chainsaws, grenade throwers, small robots, guys with jetpacks and the other guys with the Cobra assault cannon. And every now and then you will also encounter a bad guy with a female hostage, and if you get rid of him without accidentally shooting the hostage, she will thank you and run away. Also, when you defeated the last end boss in the 7th level, you're gonna encounter Dick Jones holding the president of OCP as a hostage, and after taking him out, you beat the game. Those hostage encounters that you have in the game are only just two examples of references from the movie. Also, all the levels are based on scenes/locations from the movie. Then most of the boss characters, even though there weren't that many variations of Ed 209, are also based on scenes/encounters that Robocop had in the movie. And finally, the soundtrack and digitized speech, which both sound great by the way, were also taken from the movie.
Thank you for your cooperation.
The graphics are well done and detailed, and the difficulty level of the game is somewhere between medium and hard. Or actually I would say it starts somewhere on a medium difficulty level, and the further you progress the harder the game gets. Which is typical, especially for an arcade game, since those machines were made to make money. All in all, Robocop the arcade game is a pretty good side-scrolling action game with nice graphics and a very good atmosphere thanks to the soundtrack. But now let's take a look at the Commodore Amiga version. The very first thing that you might notice is that the Amiga version doesn't look as pretty as the arcade version. The game screen and everything in it has shrunken, and Ocean Software placed a computer-style frame around it. In this frame are now all the indicators. On the top left you can see your score, then right next to it you can see the timer / the time limit that you have of the current level. On the bottom left you can see which ammunition type / weapon you are currently using, plus the bullet counter. And on the bottom right side you see the life bar. The Amiga version is almost identical to the arcade version in terms of levels, boss characters, items and enemies. Only a couple of things were changed. The first thing is that the Amiga version has 6 levels, not 7 like the arcade version, but this time there's a bonus stage after each level. In 2 of the bonus stages you are again at the shooting range like in the arcade version. Then in the other 2 bonus stages you have to match a photo of a suspect with the criminal records of the police department. And in the last 2 bonus stages you have to take care of a hostage situation, which are the same ones like in the movie. Sadly you can't shoot the guy through the skirt of the lady like Robocop did in the movie, but yeah, you can't have everything. In the bonus stages you earn extra points for your score, and you try to replenish your life energy depending on how well you did in the stage and if you actually complete the stage. And what I mean by that is, have you rescued the hostage or not, or could you find a match of the suspect photo or not. But even if you get a perfect score on any of those bonus stages, there is no way in the Amiga version to increase the life bar. Also in this version you only have one life, but there are no continues. So every time Robocop bites the dust, you have to start all over again. But overall the Amiga version is easier than the arcade version, except for the guys on the motorcycles and the other ones with the Cobra assault cannon. All the normal enemies go down after one hit, and some of the boss fights are also easier, because in the later levels of the arcade version you would face two boss characters at the same time, which doesn't happen in the Amiga version. There's always only one boss character, and a lot of times you will also find a better weapon / ammunition type right before you reach them, which makes it also easier. The second player mode was removed, and since the Amiga joystick / controller supports only one fire button, jumping is a little bit tricky in this version, because in order to jump you have to push down first and then up, or you can also push the spacebar on the keyboard instead. Except for that, the controls are actually okay. The sound effects are also well done, plus I also like the digitized speech, and the music is alright in my opinion, even though there is not a lot of variation in the Amiga version. Now I've already mentioned that the graphics are not as pretty as on the arcade version, and yeah, they are also more colorful, which gives the game a cutie look in my opinion. Not really the right image for Robocop, I guess, but yeah, anyways. I still think the graphics are not bad at all, and I'm actually impressed that the whole game fits on just one disc. But I also know that if Ocean Software would have invested a little more money for the programmers to make a 2-disc version of this game, it would have been a perfect or almost perfect arcade conversion, at least graphically. Overall I think the Amiga version is an enjoyable and good game, and definitely one of the better games with a movie license. In 1989, Robocop the video game was also released for a lot more systems than just the Commodore Amiga. There was also a version for the Atari ST, PC-DOS, Commodore 64, Amstrad CPC, ZX Spectrum, Tandy TRS-80, Nintendo Entertainment System, MSX, Apple II and the Nintendo Game Boy. Now I can't talk about all the different versions since this review would go on forever. And I also don't have access to all the available versions. But since I don't know when I ever gonna talk about those Robocop games again, I decided to also include the Atari ST version, the PC-DOS and the Commodore 64 version in this review. Now for the Atari ST version I can make it pretty quick, because except for the sound, it is completely identical to the Commodore Amiga version. Now about the sound, the music in my opinion has a lower quality than on the Amiga, and the sound effects are very poor. To me they actually sound like low budget firecrackers. So sound wise not really that great, but the rest of the game is as enjoyable as the Amiga version. Now we come to the PC-DOS version, and for that I have chosen the best possible settings, which is not a lot, EGA graphic card and sound card, but it is better than CGA graphic card and PC speaker. You can trust me on that. The PC-DOS version is the only one which includes the intro from the arcade game. And even though the graphics are a lot simpler than in the arcade version, I have to say the picture of Officer Murphy's death looks way more brutal on the PC. I actually don't know if this is good or bad, but yeah, I noticed it. Also the rest of the version tries to be a one-on-one conversion of the arcade game, but of course it can't pull it off. In terms of level designs, enemies, items and soundtrack, it is exactly like the arcade version. But the bonus stages are missing, and they also changed some of the later boss fight, which means that like in the Amiga / Atari ST version, you always fight only one boss character at a time instead of two. There are no continues and no 2-player mode in this version, but you have 4 lives this time. All the indicators are on the bottom of the game screen, and as for the controls, you can play the game with a keyboard or with a controller. But I would recommend a controller, since the PC also supports a jump button as well as a fire button, and the keyboard is not very responsive, especially when it gets a little hectic in this game. Also have to say the boss fights are a lot harder than they should be, because like in the other versions the boss characters have their weak spots in the upper region, but in order to hit those without getting hit yourself too many times by enemy projectiles, you have to shoot exactly when Robocop reaches his maximum jump height, so the timing must be perfect, which takes some time and training to pull it off. The game doesn't run that smoothly, so the frame rate is slightly choppy. The sound effects are very weak and not really worth mentioning, plus there is no digitized speech in this version. The graphics are colorful and overall okay. The music doesn't sound that great, but honestly for an old PC-DOS game I don't expect a whole lot in terms of graphics and sound. So all in all I would say the PC-DOS version of Robocop is average, not really great, but it is also not a bad game. Now finally we come to the Commodore 64 version, which according to the game has only 3 levels, but each level consists out of a couple of stages. In level 1 you start with a side-scrolling stage, then you have to rescue the female hostage like in the Amiga/Atari ST version, and afterwards you have another side-scrolling stage. Level 2 starts with matching a suspect photo with the criminal records database from the police department, then there is another side-scrolling stage. Afterwards you have to defeat Ed 209 with your bare fists in a boss fight and continue with another side-scrolling stage to level 3, which, yes, you guessed it right, starts also with a side-scrolling stage, but it is the last one of these, and at the end of it you have another boss fight with 2 Ed 209s, but you face them with your weapon and one after another, and afterwards comes the final stage, saving the OCP president who is held hostage by Dick Jones, also like in the Amiga/Atari ST version. All the indicators, which were reduced to just the score, time limit and life bar, are above the game screen. Controller wise you play the game with a joystick, and like the Commodore Amiga and the Atari ST, the Commodore 64 only supports one fire button, which you use of course to fire your weapon. This time you can also shoot downwards, to the left and to the right. Plus, Robocop can jump if you push up on the joystick, but the thing is that at the same time you also aim up with your weapon, which you're gonna do a lot in the game, so every time you're fighting an enemy above you, Robocop starts jumping around. Now, except for the fact that it looks kinda funny, I normally wouldn't have anything to complain about that. But the fact is, Robocop doesn't need to jump in this version at all. There are no obstacles or gaps, and you can easily dodge enemy projectiles by crouching. So there was actually no reason at all to include this function. In terms of enemies, there's not a lot of variety in this version, except for the bad guys on the motorcycles who will fight the same enemies over and over again in different outfits. Only in the last stages you will also face 2 different enemy types, the guys with the chainsaws and the other ones with the Cobra assault cannon. Most of the enemies will explode after you have taken them out. Those explosions will not harm you, which is really a good thing. And sometimes they will also leave an item behind, like extra life energy, better ammunition or the Cobra assault cannon. But you have to be quick because they disappear after a short time. You also have only 1 life in this version and there are no continues. But you have a checkpoint system in this version, which means that if you manage to complete a level and Robocop bites the dust afterwards, you will always start with the first stage of the next level from there on. The graphics of the Commodore 64 version are pretty good in my opinion, and the music is definitely a highlight of the game. There is also 1 digitized speech sample when you start the game, which also sounds great, but sadly there are no sound effects in this version. Robocop on the Commodore 64 is definitely harder than on the Commodore Amiga/Atari ST, because if you fail to rescue the hostage for instance, you lose the game. On the Amiga/Atari ST you could still continue the game afterwards. Also matching the suspect photo is harder, since in the other versions you could go through all the different eyes, ears, chins, noses and hairstyles yourself, and when you were done with your choices you would accept them by pushing the fire button. On the Commodore 64 the game goes through all the different variations itself and you have to push the button to accept the current choice of hair, nose, whatever. But all of this happens pretty fast, and by the time you see the matching hairstyle for instance and you push the button, it already had switched to the next one, which results in an unsuccessful match. 3 unsuccessful matches and you lose the stage. Now you can still continue with the game, but as a penalty you start the next stage with less life energy. So you really have to learn the right timing to beat the stage successfully. As a child I was not able to get past stage 5. Today, almost 30 years later, I still can't make it any further. But now I know why. Because it is impossible to beat this stage, at least without cheating. According to my research, the Commodore 64 version was rushed to make the release date. The programmers were able to create a working version, but they never had time to bug fix and finish the game. One of those bugs is the time limit in stage 5. 3 minutes is way too short to reach the end of the stage while fighting all those enemies. On my best run, which was really fast, I was able to make it to the last 2 staircases before the time ran out. But even if you were able to reach the end of the stage in time, you still have to bash down 2 metal doors at the end, which takes at least 8 to 10 seconds. So bottom line, it is impossible. At least in the European version. According to the internet, the US version was fixed before it was released, but I can't tell you if this is actually true or not. Thanks to another bug you are able to somehow glitch through the walls, which allows you to progress to the next stage. The boss fight with Ed29 that follows is also ridiculously hard in my opinion, also thanks to the time limit. If you actually manage to beat him, which I only did by cheating, you come to the last big bug that I know of. The stage with either 1000 graphic glitches or, like in my case, the not existing stage. In both cases you are able to continue the game, since Robocop, the enemies and the elevators are still visible, and that is actually all you need to make it to the end of the stage. Even though the game has a lot of bugs and is impossible to beat without cheating since it was never finished, I still like this version a lot because of the music and, let's say, my nostalgic memories with it. Today you can find a fixed version of the game made by fans that you can download for Commodore 64 emulator, which might be the way to go for those people who are now interested in the game. But since the original European version is broken more or less, yeah, I can't really recommend it, sorry. All the other versions that I've shown you in this review I can easily recommend without any doubt to gamers who like action games, also the Robocop franchise, and to video game collectors of course. And now we're at the end of my review of Robocop, the video game for the Commodore Amiga, Commodore 64, Atari ST, PC-DOS and the arcade version. And I hope you enjoyed the show, maybe see you next time, take care, bye!